Okay, so for the record, today I planned on lying in bed, eating big bags of nachos and watching reruns of The X-Files. Because I am very sick, and that's why I look very sick. But there was a news article that released today that was incredibly... it's got Twitter basically losing its mind. So you know it's gotta be good if it's getting me to pass up on the X-Files reruns. Currently, this entire matter has escalated in a matter of hours to now we have a YouTuber asking for references for solicitors so that they can sue SpikeyBits, the miniature wargaming news website, for libel. So, you know, we're gonna cover that today, sick or not. Now, before we go any further, firstly, I wanna say, I don't know any of the people involved in this story. I don't know the YouTuber, Juan Hidalgo, I don't know him, and I don't really know Rob Breyer, the author of the SpikeyBits article that we're gonna be going over. I don't have any, like, personal relationships or dealings with any of them. And secondly, I need to give you some context. Now, most people probably know about this, but essentially, contrast paints were released by Games Workshop a couple of years back. These are very cool paints, actually. They go in one big coat, they remove the need for highlighting and for shading, etc, etc. Now, those paints sold exceedingly well. And what that means is that all the other paint companies in the world are now trying to jump on that boat, because of course they are. Now, what's important for this video is that Army Painter came out with their own range of paints called speed paints. Now, this paint range initially released to rave reviews. It got a ton of great press. Most reviewers basically said that it applies on in one thick coat, does everything you expect it to, good stuff. However, there was one blogger slash YouTuber called Stally from Tale of Two Painters who noticed that the paint would reactivate. Essentially, what this meant was whenever you applied speed paint to a miniature and then you tried to apply either water or another coat of paint on top of that, the speed paint layer would get wet again and would actually rub off. So for example, if you want to do something like slap chop, you want to add on some extra detailing to a layer of speed paint, that might cause issues, it might cause layers to start reactivate, etc, etc. Though usually, if you do a layer of speed paint and then you leave it overnight, it's kind of fine to work on again in the morning. Now, this was brought up by Juan Hidalgo, the YouTuber, and apologies for the pronunciations here. I can barely get English right. I'm gonna screw up Spanish. But essentially, this YouTuber reviewed the Army Painter speed paint range and brought up this reactivation issue. Honestly, if you watch the review itself, it's pretty milquetoast. Juan Hidalgo talks about the reactivation issue kind of being a problem for some painters, maybe not for others. It's really, honestly, it's not like a crazy review at all. Probably the most kind of dubious claim in that review is that he claims that the paint would reactivate after 2 days of being left alone. I don't really see anybody else echoing that period of time, but I don't have Army Painter speed paint. I can't actually test this for myself. Now, that's all okay? So that all occurred like months ago. Now, into this picture steps SpikeyBits. This is probably the one voice in the wargaming community that is more divisive and hated than me. And they have released an article today, or yesterday, if my editor has been really slow. I can't describe it as anything other than really a hit piece on Vallejo, a rival paint brand, and Juan Hidalgo. This article from SpikeyBits essentially alleges that Juan Hidalgo was on the payroll of the rival paint brand Vallejo and was working on their contrast paint equivalents called Express Paints, and therefore bad-mouthing the competition. Now, this is obviously a very serious allegation, so let's get into this. So firstly, the article itself is called Vallejo Put Out a Hit on the Army Painter, which obviously is a little bit on the nose. A little bit of an exaggeration, I think. So the article itself says, it looks like Vallejo may have put out a hit on the Army Painter speed paint line to hurt the brand using creator Juan Hidalgo directly. So you can see all these parties have been pulled in together. Now, this is one of the main issues I have with this article from SpikeyBits. They basically say that reactivation is an invented issue with the Army Painter speed paint. I have problems with this. Firstly, the reactivation issue isn't invented. This is something that happens. If you have an Army Painter layer of paint, and then you apply water to it before it has dried, and it takes maybe a day, maybe 2 days to dry, then the paint will reactivate and will get wet again. Now, the reason why SpikeyBits are saying that this reactivation issue is invented is because they claim that Army Painter has never expected, or it's not designed to be painted this way. Essentially, the Army Painter speed paints are to be used as a single coat. You just paint them all one color and then off you pop. You're not meant to apply any other colors on top of it. Sure, but that kind of ignores how the vast majority of painters, I would say, are going to actually use the paints in practice. So this isn't like the issue is invented. This is a problem that painters at home will need to know about if you were creating content about those paints. Now, the SpikeyBits article says that the reactivation issue was purposefully exaggerated by someone who was, in fact, working for Vallejo at the time to launch a speed paint / contrast alternative. There's a couple of issues here. Firstly, I don't quite buy that the issue of the reactivation was purposefully exaggerated. And also, the article says that he invented the reactivation issue again. That's not true. Juan Hidalgo was not the first person to bring up reactivation as a problem, and he also didn't invent it as an issue. He might have exaggerated the length of time, but honestly, I don't know about that. And I don't really think that he did, to be honest. The second allegation that comes in this article, though, is that Juan Hidalgo was working for Vallejo at the time that he put out a review of the Army Painter speed paints. And that does seem to be the case. That does seem to be true. So super recently, on October the 23rd, Juan Hidalgo did put out a review for the Vallejo Express paints, which are basically the speed paint / contrast paint equivalent from Vallejo. And in this video, Juan Hidalgo does say that he has been working for Vallejo for like the last year on these paints. So content creators working for companies isn't an issue in and of itself. The problem comes in where this information isn't made available to viewers, especially if you are reviewing a rival product. That's actually a big deal. Where this article is correct is that I do think that it is unethical to review a painting brand while working for their competitor without ever actually saying that. Now, that being said, I assumed that Juan was probably under some sort of NDA with Vallejo so that he couldn't reveal that he was working with them. That's more likely the case. I understand that completely. But that means that there's two solutions to this. The first solution is you don't cover speed paints. Unfortunately, you're just so biased, you're unable to reveal to your audience that you're that biased. I think honestly, the answer might be you just don't cover the speed paints there. You can't give an honest review. Or secondly, and I haven't seen any contracts or anything here, but more than likely, he could have just said that he's working with competitors and just not been specific. Like, I think that probably would have been fine for most NDAs. So I do think that it was definitely a lapse from Juan to not reveal this information whenever he was actually doing the Army speed paint video. In Juan's favor though, he does make very explicit that he is biased in favor of Vallejo whenever he does his review of the Vallejo Express paints. So I don't think he set out to deceive anybody. I think this was probably a mistake on his part. And I think that intentionality is actually super important. The way that this SpikeyBits article is written, it makes it sound like Juan Hidalgo was paid by Vallejo to go after speed paints and to try and badmouth them in some way. That he's been contracted by a rival and the content creators are being paid by paint brands to go after one another. I think that's just entirely hyperbole. I don't think the article's entirely fair. So if you go down, you can see that really, this article does seem to be a little bit of a hit job against Juan Hidalgo. I don't know whether or not Juan maybe offended Rob Breyer at some stage. I don't know what's going on there, but it really is crazy like how much he goes after him. Because you gotta remember, Juan wasn't even the guy who discovered the reactivation issue. This was Stolly brought this up. Now, admittedly, Juan has done a couple of videos on speed paints, for sure. And there's a ton of cherry-picked articles and comments from Juan about the Army Painter speed paints, but I think that SpikeyBits goes a little bit hard on him, to be honest. There's also some other random stuff just gets brought up in the article about like some random Twitter user who was like questioning the authenticity of Juan's painting. I don't know why this is relevant. It feels like at a certain stage that the article just goes on to try and defame Juan Hidalgo's character, which I just find weird. It's just weird. It doesn't really feel like journalism. Also brings up the fact that Juan's business as a goldsmith that's not related to wargaming at all was failing during COVID, as many businesses were, and he was advertising his business on his YouTube channel. Again, I don't see how this is relevant here, guys. I mean, it's not as if that Juan here was starving on the street and he manages to get access to some of the speed painters, and Slugworth from Vallejo's like, boy, if you manage to defame them, I'll give you some money. Like, that's not the scenario here. I think the real issue is simply that Juan Hidalgo was working for Vallejo on their paints, and he failed to disclose that whenever he did a review of the Army Painter speed paint. I don't think that necessarily was intentional. I don't think he set out to deceive anybody, but that ultimately that does undermine his review, and that does deceive his audience. I think that was a bad thing. I think it was unethical, but I don't think it was malicious. Rob's point in this article, I think, gets completely undermined by trying to create this intentionality where it doesn't really exist. Now, Juan Hidalgo has given a little bit of a response to this article. He just tweeted about it a little bit. In fact, Twitter overall is up in uproar. You should see all the content creators on Twitter are going absolutely wild. Everybody hates SpikeyBits, and I think this is another opportunity for everybody to like bang on the hating of SpikeyBits drum. So actually, the article SpikeyBits has been updated since I read it this morning. It looks like they have now included the response from Juan Hidalgo. Juan is obviously a bit annoyed. To be honest, I feel like I would be annoyed as well. Like, look at some of the language in this. Talking about his struggling business during COVID, the article says, quote, "Perhaps this explains his motives to pivot to this space and make a go of it full time. Everyone has the right to provide for their family, but at the end of the day, how you go about it is almost as important as the content itself." Like, fuck off. I think the tone of this entire SpikeyBit article was off. And ultimately, I think if you want to boil this down, this entire article is making a mountain out of a molehill, but there's no smoke without fire.
What about smoke machines? Dry ice.
I think that ultimately, at the end of the day, this was a problem. It should be flagged as an issue, and it's a good reminder to those of us content creators, people who work in this space, that we gotta be really careful about this stuff, you know? We have to always disclose everything. This is what I always do. I always disclose when I'm being paid. I always disclose when I've gotten stuff for free. I try to reveal all of my biases at all times, but everybody is biased. Now, I don't think this is the end of the story. I think it's going to develop as time goes on. And in fact, actually, Juan has tweeted out that he's currently looking for a solicitor because I think he might be looking to take this further in a courtroom. So there might be a lawsuit that develops around all of this. So I'm going to keep following this as it develops on. And of course, if you disagree with me, if you agree, if you have any other thoughts, let me know in the comments below. And I'll catch you next time. Thanks to all my patrons, especially Sonic Bread. And I'll see you guys. Bye-bye. Right, now for some nachos and X-Files. What a lovely Wednesday.